Welcome to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. I am John Gulliver, and I will introduce this series. This seminar series is co-sponsored by the Water Resources Center and the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory, both at the University of Minnesota, and based upon funding from the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. I would like to turn over the introduction of our speaker to John Bilotta, who knows him well. John, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gulliver. And before we begin with our seminar series, I do want to say thank you to Dr. Gulliver and Dr. Andy Erickson and all the crew at SAFL that has made the Stormwater Seminar Series possible for 2021. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Michael Dietz. Mike is an extension educator at the Center for Land Use, Education, and Research, and also the director of the Connecticut Institute for Water Resources. Similar to our Water Research Institute here, the Water Resource Center in Minnesota. Mike has a long history of stormwater and LID research and extension education. And today he's going to share some of his experience and wisdom and programming with us about our need to increase capacity for all of us to do our work in stormwater management, and also to train the next generation, our future stormwater leaders across the country. And we do that in part by looking to our undergraduate students and other youth and how we can train them to do some of our work in communities and help fulfill some of our goals. And so today, Mike is going to talk about one of the programs that he leads and has met some of these objectives, and that is the Stormwater Corps, integrating undergraduate student training into municipal stormwater retrofit planning. Please join me in welcoming Mike on this cold, snowy Minnesota day here. But thanks for joining us all. And Mike, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
My pleasure, John. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Can you hear me okay and see the screen? Just want to make sure we're good to go.
Looks great, Mike. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's my pleasure to be here today. It's really exciting to be part of this seminar series. And I just wanted to acknowledge my colleagues here, Chet Arnold and Dave Dixon, who are listed on the title slide with me here. They were my collaborators on this project and have been working with municipal officials for many, many years, which I'll talk about today. So the first part of this presentation, I need to give a bit of background as to how this program came together, because it wasn't exactly a linear process that drove this one. So it's a little bit complicated. So I'm going to do my best to weave this story for you to just tell you about how this all came together. Then I'll talk about some of the specifics about the Stormwater Corps program that we've been working on. And then we'll finish up with ways that we could potentially translate this to work that might involve you and bring it outside of academia, or I guess you'd still need to involve academia in some way, but maybe just not the typical model that we've been working with here, maybe in some other way. So I'll be looking for some input from you as I wrap up the talk today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in here. So we'll start way back when. So 1990, great year, the year I graduated from high school. So this is the early 1990s is when the Connecticut NEMO program began. So this is the Non-Point Education for Municipal Officials program, started by Father Nemo, my colleague and friend Chet Arnold, who just recently retired. So this program was very unique because it was the first of its kind that recognized the connection between land use and water quality in communities, and specifically in our state in Connecticut here, where land use is decided at the local level. Chet and some of his colleagues at that time recognized the need to provide some information to those making those decisions, because they didn't always know what the background information was and how land use did really impact water quality. So that program started here in Connecticut and then expanded through the National NEMO program around the country. And also through that time period, the Center for Land Use Education and Research was developed, which became kind of an umbrella program for NEMO and some of the other geospatial work that was occurring here. Later on in this time period, around 2005, I joined the NEMO and CLEAR team after grad school and worked with a colleague to adapt the rain garden guide here in Connecticut, an extension colleague of mine, So back in those days, there wasn't many electronic versions of things. The fanciest aspect of this was a PDF version that we could put on the web. So we had that publication and basically used that as a basis for teaching landscape contractors, municipal public works folks, and others on how to design and implement rain gardens on their own for customers in their communities, that sort of thing. So did some trainings around the state. Usually these programs involved a portion of classroom teaching and also a hands-on component. So we would always try to get people out there doing these types of tasks hands-on, because I believe that's how you learn the best, when you're actually doing something yourself. All right, the next piece of the puzzle here. So around 2009, my colleagues at Clear, Chet, and others worked with Horsley Witten, a consulting firm here in the Northeast, to do a watershed analysis for the Eagleville Brook watershed here, which drains a good portion of the UConn campus. So this was in response to a TMDL, or total maximum daily load, for impervious cover that had been implemented for Eagleville Brook, which was the first of its kind. So there had been other surrogate pollutants that had been used for TMDLs, but this was the first time in the nation that impervious cover was used as a surrogate. So this project involved some very detailed site investigations on campus, looking down manholes, trying to figure out what pavements and buildings drained in what direction, the creation of a technical report, and then this culminated with a watershed management plan that we put together for Eagleville Brook. So the link is here. The project is fairly old at this point, but there's still some good information on this website if anybody's interested in it there. Next, somewhere around 2012, when the smartphone revolution was basically just a couple of years old at that point, my colleague Dave Dixon sat across the hall from me at that point and knew that I was doing the outreach on rain gardens and using our rain garden design guide as the basis for what we were doing. And Dave was a techie and always, was interested in apps at that point. And he asked me, he said, "Had you ever thought about building an app for the rain garden, start to, to help install rain gardens to replace the paper guide and PDF version of the guide?" And I hadn't thought about that, and it was a fantastic idea. So we worked together to basically build the first version of this app, and we did it with a small grant from Connecticut Sea Grant. And the way we accomplished that for a very small amount of money was to collaborate with our computer science students here at the University of Connecticut. So we found a faculty member here that had a team of students, undergraduate and graduate students, and we paid them money. So they got a salary to do this, to develop the first Android and iPhone version of this app. We had to make sure they were both, because there's a fierce Android iPhone rivalry that exists to this day in Clear. I won't tell you which side I'm on. You'll have to guess by the end of the presentation. So that's how it began, with a Connecticut version of the Rain Garden app. We then got a federal award through NEFA to expand that nationally. And so we have soil and plant data for basically for 25 or so states around the country now. So this app has been publicized. We worked with partners in other states around the country to make it applicable for about 25 states. So we've continued to update it. The version that you see on the screen right now is the most recent version. So we're no longer a native app. This is basically a mobile website that can kind of be installed as an app on your phone. So the URL is at the bottom there if you'd like to check that out. And the nice thing about that is that it plays nice with both Android and iPhone, unlike my colleagues at Clear. All right, so also along the way, another piece of the puzzle here, going way back to around 2000, some of my predecessors here at the University of Connecticut who had been talking about stormwater and low impact development, which had just started in that period of time, integrating those concepts into classes that they taught, such as water quality management, not classes that I now teach. I have been teaching watershed hydrology and just took over for water quality management. So we had, my predecessors and myself had brought in these concepts, and more recently, some of the tools that we've developed, such as the app, into those types of classes, as did some of our other colleagues in engineering here at the university. But there was no full class on green stormwater infrastructure. It had been something that I'd been thinking about for a while. I've been talking with Chet about this for a while, but it's just something that we hadn't put it together yet. And also there was no formal program to integrate students in municipalities to bridge that gap. So we had been working on the extension front with the municipalities for many years, as I said, since the beginning of NEMO. And I had been teaching these classes and teaching them a little bit about what we did in the extension world and integrating some of the other technology that we were using, but we weren't bringing the students into that municipal side in a formal way. The next piece of the puzzle. So my good friend and colleague, Chris Abrupta down at Rutgers, started his water resources program in 2002. And Chris had been working in municipalities around the state of New Jersey for many years. And we learned about a program that he had adapted for his state, where he was bringing his undergraduate students from his engineering courses and providing summer jobs for them to work in municipalities and urban areas around the state. And what they were doing, the product they were providing for these municipalities was a retrofit analysis. So looking at their community, looking at ways where they could disconnect impervious cover, places where they could implement green stormwater infrastructure. And then in some cases, they were installing green infrastructure as part of that process too, because Chris just gets gobs of money from foundations and other federal agencies. And so he was a really good grant writer and got a lot of money to do this stuff around the state of New Jersey. So in around 2017, we did a pilot project trying to marry these two programs together a little bit. So some of the work that we had done here in Connecticut, we brought Chris and some of his team in to adapt their rapid assessment approach, the technique that they had developed in New Jersey. So we brought them here and did a pilot project and used that pilot project to get some federal funding. So we got a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to perform 5 retrofit plans and also implementation. So that was the key. We had a fair amount of money in that grant to do implementation of those towns. So that was quite successful. The students that we used at that time were at Rutgers though. So that was how we did the collaboration. So the towns were here in Connecticut. Chris's undergrad and grad students worked on the designs for us. And that was how that project moved forward, and it was quite successful. Next, very important piece, in 2017, we had a change to our municipal separate storm sewer system, our MS4 permit. So they were pretty progressive in this version of the permit and integrated some LID concepts into this current version. So they basically were requiring towns to establish some legal authority regarding low impact development. They had to review regulations for barriers to LID. And the next thing is the real key here. They had to implement a retrofit plan to reduce directly connected impervious cover by 2% townwide by the time of the period that this permit is up, which is in 2022. So this is a big deal. So this is something towns had not had to do before. They really didn't know how to even start this process to figure out how to disconnect impervious cover. And also, CLEAR had been providing outreach to these permittees through a grant from our Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection since 2017. So they recognized that communities were going to need support. They knew that we had a good relationship with the municipalities already. So we had a grant through them to do this formal outreach to communities, and we're still doing that now. All right, so we're rounding out all the background forces here at work. So around 2017, my colleagues Juliana Barrett and Bruce Hyde wanted to start something wanted to do something on the climate change front, and not the typical climate change research looking at atmospheric circulations and that sort of thing, but really focusing more on the impacts to communities. Because both of them had worked with municipalities in the state, and how municipalities were adapting to changing climate and many of the other factors that were involved. So they, in collaboration with Chet, got a small grant through the University of Connecticut to develop the Climate Corps. So basically integrating this classroom instruction, service learning, workforce development, and community engagement through extension. Some of our colleagues in engineering adapted the model to develop a brownfields core in 2018. And the key component of both of these is this 2-semester model. So they have a formal classroom semester with undergraduate students, all right? And so there's some typical classroom instruction. There's other activities that occur in there as well. But then the key is the practicum semester. So that's where the students take what they've learned during that first classroom semester. They are paired up with a community in the state, and they have to develop some sort of project that relates to, in climate case, it was something to do with climate change or brownfields. There were grant proposals, grant proposals that they put in as part of that process. So this is the key here, this 2-semester model. So what we do now, what we did at that point, all these things that were happening through the years, lots of different stuff, we put it all in the blender, and what comes out, poof, like magic, we have the Stormwater Corps. So this is how it was born. My colleagues, Chet Arnolds and Dave Dixon, worked with me to develop our first formal classroom course and plan for the practicum semester. So this was in the spring of 2020, we began this. And that's what we will focus on for the rest of the talk here today. So the only other thing that I'll mention, the bigger picture that happened here after this, in 2019, Chet was really the spearhead behind this, putting together a large proposal to the National Science Foundation to formalize these programs and call it the Environment Corps at the University of Connecticut, and also to formalize some of the evaluation that takes place, do some actual research on how to institutionalize these programs that were happening and expand this model to other topic areas. So that is a 5-year grant that's still occurring. All right, so on to the Stormwater Corps specifics here. So for the classroom semester, we start with some background information. We kind of break the semester down into 3 blocks here. The first part, it's basically some introduction. We don't have prerequisites for this class. So we're starting very basic with people, water cycle basics, how to delineate drainage areas in the field. This is a very important piece of this, which you'll learn more about. Talking about some of the backgrounds, some of the things that NEMO and CLEAR have worked on for many years. So the land use and land cover work that's been done here in the state of Connecticut and trends in the state, the importance of impervious cover and pulling in some national research that's been done. And then we get into some of the history of stormwater regulation. Dave is really instrumental in that with his background as a lawyer. He doesn't like to admit to many people he's a lawyer, but it does come in handy occasionally. We like to put him to work for these types of things. So the second part of the semester, we take a deep dive into the green stormwater infrastructure practices. So heavy focus on bioretention and rain gardens, on permeable pavements, other features like tree box filters, green roofs. And we talk about some projects that have been done here in the state, the Jordan Cove project, going way back to when I was in grad school. Many of you probably know about that project here in the state. Other social factors that come into play with these stormwater issues. And then also some economic considerations. So that was my grad student, Josh Snarski. He added that piece last semester, and he delivered the content for that, which was great because he had some experience doing cost estimating for construction projects. Then the last part of the semester, we do a couple of other different things here. We bring in some folks from municipalities and from nonprofits around the state, have them sit in on a panel with the students to answer questions, talk about their experiences. We then do some activities like reading site plans and also a role play activity. So this is the nice thing about having some of these other programs that like sister programs that we've been working with. So Bruce Hyde and Juliana Barrett have been doing this role play in their Climate Corps class, which is basically creating a mock public meeting for the students. So, a town meeting. So they're assigned a character and a role, and they have to do some development of this character and actually deliver a testimony. And we do that in class, and it was very successful in the Climate Corps. So we adapted that to the Stormwater Corps, and I think the students had fun with it. It was very educational. It was a lot of fun for us as well. Then the later part of the semester, we basically dig into this rapid assessment technique that we've worked on with Rutgers. We've refined it here for the state of Connecticut. So we teach the students how to do this. Then we have them perform a mini project on their own and present on that at the end of the semester. All right, so that's the breakdown for the classroom semester. So although it is a classroom semester, it is quite different than most of your typical classrooms or regular undergraduate classes where, we're not just sitting there lecturing the whole time. So there are occasional lectures. Obviously, we need to get some information across and teach them about some of these things. But if we start on the top left here, we're often having them do activities as part of something that we've taught them in class that day. Going down to the bottom left, this is where Bruce Hyde was working on this plan reading activity that we had come in, had Bruce come in and do that with us, with the students. On the bottom right, we get out on the campus here. So we're very fortunate at UConn to basically have a living laboratory of green stormwater infrastructure practices here. So we have over 60 individual installations of rain gardens, green roofs, pervious pavements on campus here. So we bring the students out. I take hundreds, over 1,000 people I brought through campus here, basically teaching them about what we're doing, how these things work. So we bring the students right out into the field and they get a really in-depth look at these things, and we talk about the advantages, disadvantages, all of that. And then on the top right, an activity that we've implemented, again, just trying to emphasize this hands-on piece. We have the students build their own pervious concrete in a lab. So they have to pick a name for their group. This particular group was the Lady Pavers. I think that was one of the best names we've had so far. So they build that pervious concrete, and then in the next class, I have to test it. So we do some infiltration testing on that pavement, and then we do the professor weight test. So it has to support my weight without cracking. So hopefully I don't gain any weight and bias the students this semester. But it's a lot of fun. It's definitely something hands-on for the students, and it's something that they'll hopefully remember afterwards. So again, quite different from typical classroom classes, even though that is our classroom portion of the Stormwater Corps. So we'll move on to the practicum semester. So we start out that practicum semester with a brief review of the retrofit assessment process. So for us, our classroom piece is in the spring. We have a summer-long break where students and faculty, let's face it, forget some of the things that we learned many moons ago. So we have to refresh everybody on the process. So we just give a very brief refresher on that. Then we move right into forming teams for them and assigning towns. So we have an established program where we solicit towns to sign up for this basically and say, yes, I want students to work on this with us. Then we have them dig right into a desktop analysis, and I'll show you what that involves. They then meet with the town to talk about things, and I'll get into a little more detail on that as well. Then they go out to the fields. I'll show you what that entails next. Then they finalize calculations, put it all together in a report, and then present it to the town. And so that's for one town. For both semesters we've done this, it's a rinse and repeat. So each group has done this for 2 towns for the practicum semester. So it's quite a bit that they do during this period of time. All right, so the desktop scan. So first, we start out at public properties. So this is the easiest place for a municipality to look at to actually make something happen because they have the control over it. Right? There are tons of properties, tons of parking lots at private buildings and shopping malls everywhere, but the logistics of making that happen are challenging. So we have the students. We also focus on the schools too, because we really like having that educational benefit. If we can pair it with some teachers that are, integrate some of this stuff into their science curriculum, the next gen curriculum, we definitely like to do that and capitalize on that, and even perhaps have the students participate in an installation. So the first cut analysis is really quite easy these days because Google Maps has such good data. So we use the high quality imagery to examine these sites to take a look at impervious cover. And one of the newer tools through Google Maps, we have the Street View, which is extremely valuable for us because you can look at a school from up above and you can get some information about it, but it's not till you see it from the side and you can see whether there's downspouts that can be disconnected or there's internal roof drainage. That really gives us a lot of information to know whether this site is worth visiting in the field or not. So this Street View has been very powerful and a great tool for us to do first cut screening. Then we'll have them overlay topography, usually contour lines on there to assist with drainage area sketching in the field. So then we set up an initial meeting with the town. This is something we've refined over the few years. We've done this to introduce the project. We want to get some information from them on what they want and what they need. And we usually have the students give their first cut of sites that they've identified at that point. So the town staff or engineers, whoever, can basically provide some input and say, okay, yeah, that one sounds good, or this one's slated for redevelopment and it's too late to change it, so steer away from that, or we've got an opportunity here, let's focus here. So that meeting is really valuable. And we just have a very brief flyer that we give to the town as well, so they can pass that along to other officials in the town so they know what's going on with the projects. Then comes the field verification piece. So we get them out from behind the computers, out into the field. So they have to print out images of each site with the imagery on there, with the contour lines. So this allows them to facilitates them to map out how water is draining on these sites. So we're walking the fields, we're looking at parking lots and rooftops and figuring out where the water is draining, and this will come into play in the next section. So there's a lot of movement around these towns and peering down catch basins and stormwater drains and sketching, and in some cases, some of the town staff do come out and meet us and talk about things, and they're interested in the process. So here's another example. A couple of town folks came out to see what was going on. And we've added these nice UConn clear orange vests. This was Dave's idea to add these. So it gives the group credibility. So you put on an orange vest and hold a clipboard, and you could be a serial killer, look fairly sketchy like me. And you put on a vest and give them a clipboard, and nobody really asks any questions. So it's often the perception of how you look that really makes people okay or not okay with how you look. And this gives me a great opportunity to bring up one of my favorite movie clips here. So any of you who've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, this is the scene right after Jack Nicholson steals the bus and takes some of his fellow patients to go fishing. So he's about to borrow one of the fishing boats at the marina, and somebody comes to question him. And he introduces all of his patients as doctors. And the guy's like, oh, okay. So it kind of made sense when he knew that they were doctors. So he just kind of let them go. So it's all about those perceptions. So this is one of my favorite scenes, and I was glad to have an opportunity to bring it up. So we do also have a little fun out in the field, just because they're undergraduate students and not little kids. Even the big kids in us like to have a little fun. So we're out at public parks and places like this, and gives us good opportunity to horse around. So then after the field visit, we have the students come back to their computer. And during the classroom semester, we've given them very detailed instructions. We've really refined these over the years too, to basically help them, step them through line by line how to calculate these drainage areas, how to actually estimate, calculate the very precise area in Google Maps, how to size the rain garden or green roof or pervious pavement for the drainage area that's leaving it. So we got detailed instructions on how to do that, how to estimate how many gallons these things will treat on an annual basis, and then also how to estimate some nutrient load reductions as well. So these numbers become really important for the towns when they're looking at these things later on. So the final deliverable is a report that gets pulled together in a giant PDF. So this is one that the students did just this semester for the town of Hebron, Connecticut. So they provide a lot of background information here. Obviously, I'm not going to read this now. I just wanted to show you the background stuff that the students provide, because many, there might be somebody in the town who knows what these things are, but this information is really is provided as a resource, some background information for them to learn about if they're not sure what these are. So every report has kind of a boilerplate background section where they go through the detail like this. Then they get into the specifics for each of the sites that they've identified for retrofits. So this is really where the meat of it is. And each of these slides is, it's just one slide here, but it took a lot of time and effort for the students to put something like this together. So you'll notice on here that the teal colored outline is the drainage area for this particular part of the parking lot. They've identified where the storm drains are, where potential curb cuts could be done, where a rain garden could be installed. So all that stuff is, put in real place in scale on the image here. Then along the bottom, they've got a lot of detail about the size of that garden, depth, the gallons treated, and the nutrient reductions. So a lot of information packed into a very visually appealing slide here. This is something that they've definitely refined over the years too, as we've given them templates, and they've made them better every time. So then finally, at the end of this report, the students sum up all those different sites. So there'll be anywhere from 5 to 10 of those detailed slides that I just showed you that, that go through various schools and town properties. And then at the end, it'll be one slide that sums up those disconnection amounts, nutrient reductions, gallons treated, and the estimated costs. So just a nice figure that the towns can look at to see the relative contribution of each of these potential sites Then the students make the final presentation to the town. So we don't do this. We throw it right at them. We put them right in the middle of it. So in the first years of this, it was in person, like you see here, but obviously now we're doing this in the COVID era. So we're doing this over Zoom or WebEx. And I have to say, although it's much preferred to be in person with people to do these kinds of things, there are certain advantages to being able to do this remotely. You know, I feel that we pull in more people. It's easier for many town staff to attend that may not have been able to make it or attend an in-person meeting. They can pop into an online meeting, whether they're working from home or in the office. It's much easier for the students that don't have to drive to, you know, distant parts of the state. I know I'm probably not getting much sympathy from, you know, complaining about driving an hour here in Connecticut, but for us, an hour is a long drive. All right. So I know in Minnesota, that's just like, you know, around the bend, but it definitely facilitates the students being able to do this, you know, from campus here. So just a couple of quotes here. So this is from this semester. Stephanie said, "I would like to thank the whole team for the work you've done for Bloomfield. This is an invaluable service that you provided us. I already have plans to work with our tree and beautification committees to look at those rain garden sites, and they're excited about the project. I can see that you, Ben, and Emma are going to be great engineers. Good luck with the rest of your program. And I look forward to working with the rest of the E-Corps again in the future." Here's another. "This is extremely helpful for the town and gives us a nice roadmap going forward to address stormwater issues." So this is really indicative of responses from the towns that we've worked with so far. They have been extremely impressed with the students and the quality of the presentations that they give, quality of the work that they put together, and the value product that they get from them as something that really will fill a need that they have in the town that is hard for them to meet otherwise. So we've really had overwhelming support from the towns for how the students have performed this process for them. So looking around the state, over 76 town projects, and I don't even think this is updated for the fall semester here. 60 towns and organizations participated. This is across all the corps. Multiple benefits here. So this, again, provides a usable product for municipalities at no cost to them, which is key. I'm sure this isn't unique to Connecticut, but our municipalities are cash strapped. They have new regulations that many see as an unfunded mandate. Anything we can do to help them meet those requirements is really, really valued by them. On the other side of it, for the students, this gives real world experience. So they get to hear from municipalities and see some of the challenges that they face. They get to present to them and answer questions to them. It's really a great experience for them. It's something they can put on their resume, and they learn about how the process works here. Some of the challenges, obviously, and I'm not going to tell you that this is easy and just go ahead and poof, it's going to appear like that. This has taken a long time, and there are still some ongoing challenges. The oversight and management of the whole process takes time. So this is not unique to the Stormwater Corps. The same thing, we've heard the same thing from our other colleagues here with the other corps. So you really need someone in charge of, for sure, you need someone in charge of that interaction between the students and the towns on those projects. So that piece is key. You know, if you don't have somebody on top of that, it's very easy for it to get away from you and lose track of it, because the town people are busy. If we're not on it, reminding them about it, they may forget about it. And the time scale comes into play here too. So this is Chet's analogy. So he likes to say that the students work on the semester time scale, which is more like a mayfly, and municipal government kind of works on the scale of Great Pyramids. So, this doesn't necessarily line up easily sometimes. So some keys to success: having relationships with the municipalities is a real key. So our long history with the municipalities in the state has been a big benefit for us on this front. So this has allowed us to tap into the existing network that we have. So for example, we have a listserv set up for the MS4 work that we do. So Dave sends out a post to this listserv, asking people, offering this, and people will reply right away, and he keeps a running list of who wants to do this. So having that set up is really helpful. The regulatory driver is also helpful. I would say it's not necessary. We've had towns participate that were not subject to the MS4 permit. They were just progressive and wanted to do this, but it definitely does help to have that regulatory driver. Finding towns that have a champion is also a really big deal. That somebody that wants to push this forward, can really go a long way to making this go from something that will sit in a, a computer file somewhere to something that actually gets looked at and implemented. And also having some local examples to visit is really useful. We're very fortunate here at the University of Connecticut to have this living laboratory that I can take students out to and show them the projects that exist here. We've brought municipal officials in to do, for these same kinds of tours. So it's really unique. Finding at least some place that has some example installations can go a long way in your area. So just to sum it up here with broader applicability. So this is where I'll throw it out to you and we can maybe discuss this with some questions. This could be a great way, a great internship program that could be developed. Having this partnership between a university in your area, consulting firms, which is something that we haven't really brought into this particular one here, but it could be a great partner, and the municipal partners. The reason I say consulting firms is because this could be a great pipeline for you to get an idea. I mean, this isn't unique to, I'm not the first person to have thought of this. Having an internship program is utilized in many ways to bring students in, give them some experience, and also recruit those who you really like. So, the ones that show that aptitude for this type of work, those are the ones, you can get some experience and see that with this type of process. So just a little cost estimate here. So we had another NIFWIF grant that was funded to expand this in 5 other towns this past year. So we did this over the summer. So a couple of the students that we had in our Stormwater Corps program worked for us over the summer for pay. So we did these analyses for 5 towns. They produced these 30 to 40 page reports for each town. We paid them $15 an hour, 30 to 35 hours per week. The total cost for all these, for 5 towns and those reports, was $15,000. So that just gives you something, a reference point to think about. So this is just a web link for a broader eCorps program, if anybody is interested in that. This is a nice website that Chet put together. We were also featured in Connecticut Planning Magazine, so there's a link for that. And with that, I will wrap it up, and thank you for your time and attention, and hope to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Mike. There are some questions rolling in both our chat box, and also I would encourage participants to put those questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll try to get through as many of these questions as we can before the top of the hour. I'm going to begin with a question that came in chat. I know, Mike, looking at our participants, many of us work with graduate students, and so this program is unique that it's working with undergrad students. And so the question here is, have any of these undergraduate students been inspired to go on to a master's program in civil engineering or stormwater or GI as a result of participating in this program? Or have they gone on to work for a municipality, but have they been inspired to make GI or LID a career choice?
That's a good question. I've had 2 who had made inquiries, and unfortunately I didn't have an opening at the time. So I know they were applying to other grad programs, but they definitely were interested. And I think this experience was instrumental in fostering that interest for them. We did have a grad student who was funded through the NSF portion. So he helped us work as a TA on this project. But yeah, I think some of the earlier students, I've kept in contact with them. They have applied to some grad programs, but I've written a few reference letters, talking about the work that they've done, but I don't have any more specifics. Like I don't have somebody working for me right now as a grad student, but I definitely think it's a good way to facilitate that process.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn to some questions from our participants. Let's see here. Have you been able to diversify your student participants, especially for working in underserved urban areas? And maybe you could talk about all those towns that the program has served so far, and the whole diversity and underserved community perspective of those and the students working in those.
Sure. Since, we're fairly new, the new kid on the block here in the core group, we probably have, let's say, maybe 10 to 15 towns that we've worked with so far. Some of those have been some good size, not the largest cities in the state, but some of the larger ones. I know for a fact that the Brownfields Corps and the Climate Corps Brownfields Corps for sure have worked in some of our bigger cities with more underserved populations because of the real need with the brownfields kind of situation in the big cities. So yeah, I guess so far we've kind of accepted any town who has come forward and said we need help, and so we just respond to everybody, and we definitely hope to get the broad spectrum from our very rural communities who have very different needs here in the state to our urban communities in the state.
Great. So the next question, Mike, here is, does the Stormwater Corps program aid the town entities in pursuing or identifying mechanisms to implement the projects that teams come up with? Is the first part of the question. I'm going to add a second, is any metrics about how many towns have actually implemented some of these projects or plans?
Yeah, that's a good one. So for sure, I know that at least 2 have put in grant proposals for projects that were outlined in these plans that we put together for them. So I know for sure they're using it as a basis for putting in grant proposals. And actually that number may be higher. I'm forgetting about a recent one that I just corresponded with someone about, that they're using the information as well. So for sure, 2 to 4 have utilized the information to put in a grant proposal. Nothing is jumping to mind right now as to one that has been actually implemented as of yet. The other one, the larger grant that we got, that one involves implementation. So we're doing it as part of that. I really like to see that the implementation happen. For the towns, if there's no funding to do it, it can be challenged. That's the one challenge that we're up against is, we definitely try to do what we can to support them and give them information to try to find some funding, but we can't do it all for everybody.
Great, thanks, Mike. So I think the next question relates to some of the first semester work and the topics that you teach before the students start working on their planning projects. It looked like stormwater ponds and wetlands were not included in that beginning curriculum of the course. Can you talk a little bit more about why that may or may not be? And at any point, do you talk about the additional benefits some of these DI practices provide? Are you doing a holistic approach of education for these students?
Sure. So yeah, we don't put a big focus on the traditional stormwater management ponds, so detention ponds, even like enhanced detention or extended detention basins, constructed wetlands. We mention them briefly because they're part of the toolbox. But as far as how Connecticut looks at what is disconnected, it has to be able to retain the first inch of runoff from the drainage area. So our typical detention basins, our constructed wetlands, they're not designed to infiltrate water. So that's really why we steer towards the green stormwater practices that are more easily implementable, that it's easier to do a retrofit to actually disconnect that stormwater or disconnect that impervious cover from the stormwater system, which is what they need to do to fulfill the permit requirements. So that's why we do put a heavy focus on that.
Thanks, Mike. So another question here. So for the projects that have been implemented that you know of, has there been any long-term monitoring or follow-up either by your program or students in those longer-term established projects?
No formal monitoring. I'm kind of the mindset that, we've pretty much proven with the early monitoring that this stuff works if it's taken care of. Much of the monitoring that goes on now is really looking at fine details of, media specifications to capture specific pollutants, that sort of thing. We know that if we take care of these things, they will continue to work. So that's what we kind of focus on an informal basis, making sure the town is aware of the MINS requirements and checking on them informally to see if they're being taken care of. That's part of what I do. Part of my responsibilities here at UConn is to work with facilities to make sure our actual practices get maintained and taken care of. So I'm well aware of the challenges associated with that.
Mike, So another question is, another familiar program to many people is the EPA Rainworks Challenge.
Yes.
Is there any connection of that program to your program? And why or why not? Rationale or any connections?
Sure.
Or programs across the country that you know of that you've incorporated into your model?
Yep. There's no formal connection here, but I will say this semester, one of the students that worked for us over the summer came to me and asked if I would be one of the faculty advisors on their Rainworks package. And he just sent me the final thing that he just submitted this week. So he worked with others in landscape architecture and several other students who are in my classes as well. And they put together a fantastic proposal for our Avery Point campus. So although we don't have this formal linkage, I think it's an easy fit because the students that are working on the Stormwater Corps see this and they're like, I can do this. I think they feel empowered based on the things that they've learned.
Thanks, Mike. Well, as you know, the best ideas are stolen. The relation to this question is, like NEMO and other programs, would you be able to help launch a program like this in another state? Is the question from a participant.
We would provide any information that we could. Again, as you know, our time is obviously limited. Everybody's busy these days. So we don't have a formal allocation to expand this in other states right now. But I know that's something that Chet is very interested in. So even though he's retired, he's still working part-time on this project. So any way that we could facilitate that for you, we're happy to share anything that we can to help you do this. I can't do it for you, but I'll give you everything that I've got to make it happen.
Thanks, Mike. Another question here. Would it be possible to offer the classes through continuing education versus a semester basis? What's your thought on that?
For other audiences, you mean, besides undergrad students?
Yeah, I think that's partially that would be a challenge here, right? The undergrad students that feed in your program are registering for a semester course, right? And
right. I mean, anything's possible. If it's done, maybe it's done in an off time, like over the winter break or over the summer or something like that. And then you could have others besides undergrad students participate. It certainly could work. I think that trying to do it fully remotely would be a real challenge. So we've struggled with that because of the hands-on component of even the classroom portion for this particular project. It's a real challenge to do this just over WebEx or Zoom. Some of this can be done. Obviously it's possible to do some of it, but I really struggle to not have those hands-on activities for the students.
All right, Mike. Another question I have here is on demand. What has demand looked like? Both demand, how many undergraduate students are coming to this program? What's demand been like from that viewpoint? And also, what has been the demand from towns? And you touched on that, but how do you get your towns? How do they apply? Is there too many for you to serve? Are there too few? So if you could talk about those pieces of demand.
Sure. So this spring will be our third classroom version. We went from 9 students the first semester. We had about 15 or 17 last year, and we maxed out at 25 for the upcoming semester, and I capped it because any more than that makes it difficult to do some of the hands-on stuff that we do. So there's definitely been growth and interest from the student side, and we've moved this from a special topics class to a formal listing in the course catalog now, which helps too. So that has definitely grown, and it was the same kind of progression with the other core classes. And from the towns, again, having the relationships that we have with the municipalities through NEMO and CLEAR, specifically the MS4 program. So Dave keeps this running list that he'll throw out these calls to our listserv asking for towns who want to participate. And he keeps a running list, and we have more towns than we had students in the past 2 years. So we'll see how it goes in the next semester here. With more students, I'm hoping we can meet all the need, but more students means more oversight too for that practicum semester. So we're trying to find the balance there too.
Wow, impressive growth. We'll take one last question here, and then we'll take a small break before we go to our panel discussion. I think we touched a bit on this, but I'll ask again, do you know of any graduate programs that do something similar to Stormwater Corps? You know, so they're working with graduate students or PhD students, getting them out to work with communities directly.
The main one that I know of is Chris. So Rutgers, you know, he's got grads and undergrads in there. And he might have, you know, more clear examples on students who've come through both and gone out to do work on this stuff in the real world too. So he's probably, in my opinion, the leader on this particular front.
Great, and I'll add a response for Minnesota. We have a program called the Resilient Communities through the Humphrey School, but it doesn't just touch on LID and water. It's other resilient issues too, but that is aligning graduate and PhD candidates with community for projects, but with a bigger umbrella.
Gotcha, okay.
Well, with that, I really appreciate the presentation, Mike, and a lot of great conversation and questions here. And we're going to take a small break, and we're going to continue this discussion with adding a little bit of Minnesota flair, offering perspectives with Mike, with 3 other panelists from Minnesota. So we will take a short 5-minute break. I see 10:54 Central Time on my clock, so we will start right before 11 a.m. Central Standard Time with our panel. So please take a short break, and we will be back in just a few minutes.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. My name is Andy Erickson, and it is my honor to moderate our panel discussion today. It's also my honor and privilege to introduce our local panel experts who have graciously agreed to serve on the panel for this topic. I'm going to start by first giving Mike a virtual round of applause for his presentation. Thank you so much, Mike, for giving that keynote and setting the stage for our topic today. And as I mentioned, we have a great panel. I'm going to start with our first panelist, Shahram Missaghi, who is a water resources regulatory coordinator at the city of Minneapolis. So Shahram, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to this topic today?
Well, again, thank you for having me here. I'm happy to share that my experience has been all positive. I have absolutely enjoyed working with the volunteer groups and the interns. You know, the city of Minneapolis is a big city, so we have multiple departments and multiple individuals that work with many different programs. The programs I've worked with are the engineering interns and the Minnesota Green Corps, which is administered through Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And I have much admiration and much praise for their work.
Very good. Thank you, Shahram. Our next panelist is Becky Rice. Becky is the executive director for Metro Blooms. So Becky, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to this topic today?
Hi, Andy. Metro Blooms is a nonprofit that educates residents about the benefits of rain gardens and native plants and how they can adopt practices in their yard, and we help them install practices in their yard as well. So we hire students from the School of Landscape Architecture to work with residents to come up with a design for their plan. And we work with the Minnesota Conservation Corps program to install the practices, help residents install the practices in these neighborhood-wide initiatives. And we also host a Green Corps member. We have done that for the past 10 years, had a Green Corps member that works with us in the office in developing projects, new projects from with Metro Bloom. So we've had a great experience working with young people, and they've always been just really enthusiastic, passionate about the work, and really great to work with at all aspects of the youth that we work with.
That's great. Thank you, Becky. Thank you. Our next panelist is Anna Eleria, who is the Planning, Projects, and Grants Division Manager at Capital Region Watershed District. So Anna, from your experience and perspective, how do you relate to this topic today?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm with Capital Region Watershed District. It's a local unit of government that is focused on protecting and improving our water resources within our watershed boundaries. We're a special unit of government, and we conduct our work through various ways. We monitor and research water resource issues. We plan, design, and build clean water projects with a focus on green infrastructure. We offer a grant program. We have a regulatory program. So how this relates to our organization and our experience is that we rely on a pipeline of students and recent graduates to help us promote, implement our work and carry out our mission. That is essential. And we have hosted a Green Corps member like Shahram and Becky in their respective organizations. We've had 3, and they've been involved in all aspects of our work, getting that real world experience in the field. We also host our own seasonal employees when we're really busy from April through October, inspecting construction sites for erosion sediment control, proper installation of best management practices, helping us carry out our stewardship grant program, and meeting with property owners who are interested in adopting clean water projects. So they help, like in Michael's situation, do sort of this rapid assessment of sites and identify where does the water flow, what might be the most suitable BMPs at the site, and come up with a concept plan for clean water projects. And that is offered free to property owners in our district. We also need a lot of help with our education outreach component. We feel like with all aspects of our work, even if you are more technically focused, promoting the work is really important. So community outreach is something they've assisted with. And then there's all that work back in the office to evaluate the performance of the BMPs, keep track of it, and evaluate our programs to see if they're effective. So, they're a critical part of the work of CRWD, and interested in learning more about what others are doing as well. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Anna. I will not ask for Mike's relation to the topic. We had a great keynote presentation to give a demonstration of his experience and how we laid the foundation and groundwork for this discussion today. Before I get into questions, though, I do want to actually kind of reiterate a couple things that our panelists mentioned in their relations. We have several local programs actually here in Minnesota that engage undergraduates and other students and youth with stormwater professionals. And so the Minnesota Green Corps program is one example of that. I will drop some text and a link for the Minnesota Green Corps program into the chat for everybody, so you can see that and how to find out more information if you want to be a host site. All of our panelists today have hosted Green Corps members, and so they're speaking from that experience and others. And I hope to be able to really give everybody in the audience today really good information about the benefits, the challenges, as Mike kind of mentioned too, and everything that goes along with this through this discussion. So with that, I want to start into our first question for the panel. Again, everybody in the audience, please post questions in the Q&A box. I'll be mixing in those questions with questions that I've already pre-prepared for our panel. So post your questions, we'll get them answered. But my first question for the panelists today is, we've seen some of the benefits from Mike's program. And I want to know from our local panelists what we've seen in Minnesota as the biggest benefits of engaging students and youth in the work that we do in stormwater and green infrastructure. So anybody can chime in and start with that question.
I can start off. From CRWD's experience, we've really enjoyed working with our Green Corps members and seasonal employees. the young adults bring so much energy, optimism, and creativity to the work. The Watershed District is fortunate we don't have a lot of turnover in terms of staff. So, it's nice to bring in new people in there to bring a set of fresh eyes and new perspectives to ongoing challenges. What I've also found, having worked in the field for 20 years, classes that I was taking in my graduate program at Tufts University, students are taking it in undergrad. They're given more the tools, in particular, like the hydrology, the GIS, some of that modeling work in their undergrad that came later on, back when I was a student. And I'm not going to give the year as to when that was, but in any case, so I think that's really essential to the work in our organization, that for us to be effective and most current and responsive to today's environmental challenges and meet the needs of our community, we need their fresh eyes on that work. And then I will also say, and this is, one of the benefits for us, and I'm going to be honest here, is sometimes there are things we cannot get to, and where we just don't have the capacity with our full-time permanent staff. And it's a good opportunity to give those types of projects, which may be more on the evaluation side for us, on things on how effective are we in distributing clean water projects through our watershed, give those types of projects to them. And it's nice to get those, again, fresh eyes on it. So.
Yeah, I love that. We work a lot with undergraduates, obviously, at the University of Minnesota, and I love the energy, like you mentioned, that they have, the new perspective, the eyes, the thinking outside the box. What other responses and big benefits have you noticed with working with undergrads and youth?
Well, I can say, from our perspective, we work with, the Conservation Corps crews in particular are just, and all of them, I have to say all of them, that they're just super hardworking. And the programs that we work with all provide a lot of on-the-job training, so that the youth, young adults come to us really ready to work. They've had the safety training, and they know how to use the equipment, and how to be those early career kind of training that has always really helpful. So when they come, they're ready to work, and like Anna said, great attitude, energetic and passionate. From another perspective, though, we look at this as an opportunity really to provide great experience for the young people as well, because the Green Corps model and AmeriCorps model is one that it's a service model, so that they're not getting a lot of pay, and we see this as an opportunity to really create a value for those young people who are interested in our field, and we can share with them, give them a great professional development opportunity. So we can provide them mentorship, and we can train them in everything that we know about designing, installing, inspecting, reporting on maintaining rain gardens. And in turn, we often have the opportunity to develop a great new employee, and maybe get a new project off the ground that we didn't have funding to, for that startup funding. So they provide us a great benefit, and we try to make it as much as possible a mutual sharing, that we are giving back to those young people. And it's also an opportunity for us to, we look at this as a justice from a justice perspective, to introduce young people who different backgrounds who may not are not typically represented in the environmental field. So we are, when we're hiring and working with youth and young adults, we're really giving preference to disadvantaged or low-income youth or BIPOC youth who we just don't see in the environmental field. So there's those are a lot of benefits that we can provide as a, as a mission-based nonprofit. That's how we look at this as well. We get a lot out of it, and and we have the obligation in turn to give back as well.
That's
Sure,
great. Other thoughts, please, Shahram.
Yeah, I was just going to add 3 quick things, and I know the first one is a repeat, but I do want to state again that how important is this idea of getting fresh ideas and enthusiasm by the staff. I think that's really important. Just like grad school, we just fed by the new ideas of new students, and I think it's the same thing with at least focusing on the Green Corps. That's one part that I've benefited a great deal, is this fresh idea. Many cases we start with a project that we've been battling for like months and years, but the new person comes with a new idea and new doors open and they get the job done, which is always great. The second thing I think that has its benefit is I see myself and our staff to learn how to work with the newer generation, with the newer ideas and with fresh ideas. I think that's always just building capacity. And the third thing I think is, again, just the Green Corps, is the fact that these members have already made a commitment to service. So they come with the idea to service. And that's really, again, as a public service, here it is, folks who are committed to spend 10, 11 months, and they know they're not going to get rich. They're just basically offering a service. So it's really, those are the benefits. And I think that kind of energizes the group as well.
Mike, did you want to add anything, or do you want me to move on to the other Q&A questions we have coming in?
Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Great. So there's actually, there's several things in your responses, panelists, that are reflected in the questions we have coming up. So I hope I can hit on all of them again. There's a question that came up, actually it's more of a comment, but it turns into a question for you. And the comment is, having students involved in the evaluation efforts related to low impact development and green infrastructure helps them develop those critical thinking skills, right? Those analytical and critical thinking skills. And so if they can learn the fundamentals of what a program or practice should include and have hands-on experience based on that criteria, it will make them better designers, better planners, right? Better professionals. It gives them kind of that start. And what I want from the panelists, what I want you to comment on is, what are some of those non-textbook skills and qualities that they develop through programs like this? So we can learn equations, we can learn designs, but what about critical thinking? What about problem solving? What about social skills and working with people, working on a team and working with the communities? What have you seen in your Green Corps members, your students, your interns, in their development of those types of skills?
I can start. We always project management skills for when we're working with the Green Corps members in our office, as that's what we know. Their students are most successful if they come in with those project management skills, but that's pretty rare for a young person to have those. So that's kind of where we start with. We have some tools in our office for managing projects, and just helping them to develop those project management skills is throughout the internship is what we're looking at focusing on with young people.
Yeah, that's a really good one. The project management skills. I would add a couple things to that we can teach them with these real world experiences. First is communication skills. Our field, our technical field, is filled with a ton of technical jargon, right? And lots of acronyms that unless you have taken coursework and have been working in the field for a long time, they have very little meaning. So I think, and that's why this is a very important program and comprehensive program of the district, is communication and engagement, and marrying that up. We as entities don't typically own this land, so we've got to convince others, right, to do so. We can show them the engineering drawings, the site plans, numbers, but if they don't understand what's in it for them and what it's simply doing to improve the landscape, their neighborhoods, their communities, their sites, so I think that's one thing, just using plain language, communicating and trying to relate to your audience. We can teach that at our organization. The other thing is, and this again relates to the non-technical side of things, but it's at times more complex to implement green infrastructure projects on the regulatory side, the finance side, the policy sides of things. Michael, during his presentation, mentioned in response to questions about implementation, what has happened afterwards, and funding's a big piece of it. So I think it's important for young adults to see, you can show it's feasible on the construction side of things, but there are other barriers and challenges that need to be overcome, and sometimes that's going to take time, so learning that on the job, I think, is helpful, gives you a little more perspective.
I think that is so true about learning the time, because these folks who start with us, they have 10 to 11 months to walk away with 3-4 deliverables, and I know on my job, I can think about, well, we'll get this done in the next 2 or 3 years, but these folks have just very short time. So they're sort of under pressure to learn very quickly the social skills you talked about, or the office culture. And quickly they have to figure out, well, who is going to be doing the work? And in many cases, who will carry the work forward after they're gone? Because they like to see their work continue. So I think it really helps for them to get a sense of office culture, not necessarily to adapt it or understand it, but just, okay, this is how I'm going to do a reconnaissance. This is how it works. And this is what I need to get the work done.
Other responses to that?
I'll just throw 2 quick things in, Andy. So working with the groups, the students, that's definitely something that can be challenging. And, we try to do our best to facilitate that. But I didn't mention this in the talk, but through the practicum semester, we kind of step them through the process for the first time that they work with, and then give them a little more autonomy for the second one. So they have to be initiating things and setting up meetings, to work with their fellow students to make this stuff happen. And Dave, this was something new he did this year, was kind of putting them in charge of making the contacts with the towns and facilitating that. So that is a learning for them, and it's also a learning process for them to learn, to see how the municipalities work and how frustrating it can be sometimes when you have people who aren't interested, or you have people who are interested but don't have money, and the unfortunate realities of municipal life.
Yeah, that's great. This actually, so I want to take this to kind of the next stage. So we talked about building these skills, building up students, giving them experience, critical thinking, project management experience, and communications. I'm curious, and this kind of came up a little bit earlier in a question for you, Mike, during your presentation. And the question is specifically Green Corps, but in general, working with internships, how has diversity, equity, environmental justice, how have these topics kind of evolved through these programs, especially in recent years, given everything that's been going on? How have you seen that play out in the programs and in the students you're working with, and in the communities that you're working with? What has been the response there, and what have been your observations through this?
I can start. We've, in the last few years, we've had the George Floyd murder in our city, in Minneapolis, and I feel like the young people in our office have really pushed pushed us to think about justice and environmental justice and equity in new ways that we hadn't thought of before. So I feel like, yeah, they've really, we've really grown a lot, and it's the young people that we've worked with that have pushed us in that direction. So in a good way. I also think that they have felt, the pains of the, pandemic, working in a pandemic and working in, the climate change and the riots or the uprising. I feel like they have felt that much more. So it's, it's important that we are, recognizing that everything that we're going through, it seems to be, they're feeling it much more so than we are. So
yeah, there is definitely a sense of heightened awareness, which is great. It's because I know from my case, you start maybe giving up hope and maybe settling for less, and they remind us this is not right and we need to move a lot more further down the road, and which is good. We need that. Again, this they have a lot more hope, and we all have a lot more hope, and things have progress. But definitely diversity and the environment's a field that needs to do a lot more in that area, and we're making strides, I think, a little bit.
I'll add to the conversation that's with an example. One of our Green Corps members in 2017, 2018, he was tasked with taking a look at our BMP database for clean water projects and understanding their distribution across our 40 square miles. And, and most of this is located in the city of St. Paul. For those of you who aren't familiar with Capital Region Watershed District, and the capital city is very diverse as it pertains to race, ethnicity, financial situations, ages, and education. So nonetheless, very diverse. But what he was seeing was that the distribution of clean water projects tended to happen, and these are voluntary-based grant-funded projects, happen to take place in the more affluent, whiter, highly educated neighborhoods. But what he also did as part of that analysis, he overlaid all of this demographic data and really highlighted this disparity within our watershed district for clean water projects. And it has led to us at the district putting more focus in areas where we both don't have a lot of projects, but it's also areas that are more diverse across, race, ethnicity, education, finance. And this has been documented and led to a real focus in our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan in the district, as well as our watershed management plan, to spend more time and energy in these areas to engage these communities and try to meet them where they're at and provide them the resources for adopting behaviors. So I think it's evolving. It's a work in progress, trying to bring equity and environmental justice to underserved areas. And we've just touched the surface on that at the Watershed District and recognize we need to do more. But yeah, as others have been saying, I think the young adults in our office are pushing us, to raise that as a priority in our organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a really big benefit, right? They challenge us to not succumb to the status quo, right? To rise above, to reevaluate, what are we doing? What are we thinking? Not doing it the same old way. These new perspectives and especially the passion and the energy that they bring, because they energize all of us, right? To do more, to do better, to think bigger. So I think that's a really, really big benefit that I want to reiterate that's come up through this. And there's another question in the Q&A that kind of pushes this another aspect. Do you know, has anybody looked at social vulnerability and geospatial data? So Anna was talking about overlaying these different demographics over the spaces where we do infrastructure, green infrastructure and clean water projects. As social vulnerability come into any of these, have you looked at that in your spaces, in your jurisdictions, and the projects that you are considering? And if not, perhaps that's the next frontier, right?
Yeah, I was going to say at the watershed districts, we're not familiar with the social vulnerability geospatial data, but I'd be very interested in looking at it. We have looked at the metropolitan councils and ACP 50 areas of racially concentrated poverty layer, and overlaid that in our watershed, and we know where those areas are defined. We are trying to move away from that due to some of the unintended connotations with looking at that kind of information. So I guess we're learning, like at one point it was good for us to look at the ACP 50 index, and now we're trying to move away from that. So I think there's a lot, it's evolving and a lot for us to learn, but I would be very interested in learning more about social.
Right. I guess I was trying to think how maybe you define social vulnerability. I mean, definitely there are many programs the city of Minneapolis is involved with. Actually, that was one of the draws for working for city of Minneapolis, is the consciousness and having so many different programs focused on all of the people and all the populations. I know the city has different zones, green zones, and they look at the interaction of the communities, and they look at the resources, the water resources we're offering to each community. I know in our team, that's a big push for the green infrastructure. How are the green infrastructure promoted? Are we getting the participation of the communities? So there are multiple programs going there. I know in our own work, for example, one of the volunteer work adopted drain program, we focused a great deal on where have we provided education, where do we get the responses, what sort of a community responding back, and so forth. So it's definitely happening, but love to hear how else is happening other places too, as Anna mentioned.
I can just say that when we look at the PCA has, it's the EPA has some maps that maps environmental justice communities, and I think they probably overlap with the socially vulnerable communities perception. So when we look at those communities, and I think that's kind of what you were saying too, Anna, is we reach out to those communities and see if there's opportunities to work with them on projects. That's and the important thing that we have learned in doing that too is once we start working in a community, it's not about doing a project and then going away when the project is done. It's a relationship, and it's building that relationship and building trust in the relationship. A trusting relationship is really important, and it's a lot. It's not as easy. What am I trying to say? That it's a lot of work to build trust, because trust is broken, I think, and so it's once we are working with a neighborhood, it's listening in that neighborhood. What does the neighborhood want? Not what do we want? What does the neighborhood want? What do the residents want in their community? And what we've heard is the question of green infrastructure comes up, or not green infrastructure, green gentrification comes up, and what we've heard from the communities that we work with is the answer to the concern about green gentrification is that the jobs that we create with our projects are available to the residents in the community. So we're hiring young people to work in our crews. We're hiring from the community, and we're actively training the young people that we work with. And the contractors we work with, we're looking for contractors from the community when we need to hire a contractor. So those are all part of helping to build the relationship. But I think it's a long-term relationship. It's not a come and go. It's a long-term, and it's a long-term listening and stepping back from, these are all my objectives. This is what I want to do. It's how can I be supportive of what you want to do in your community? How can we bring value to your community?
Yeah. Maybe I have a confession to make. I don't feel the greatest about some of the terms and labels that we use to define communities. I'm maybe a little bit sensitive to use labels such as underserved or underrepresented, vulnerable, because from my point of view, if I have not brought the people to the table, why am I putting a label on them? I am the one who have not brought the people to the table, and I have denied their rights. So it's burden is on me than to say, well, I'm going to go. So that's how I see it. So I'm always, if it's for all people, then it's for all people. I guess that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. And you know, Becky also said listening. I feel like that also ties into what we talked about before, developing the skill of listening to people, right? Listening to everybody and what do they need, not what do we want them to need, right? Yeah. So that listening piece and inviting them to the table, I think that's a really, really good point, Shahram. Just getting them in the room, right? So we can talk, get everybody in the room, get everybody's perspectives and work together, right? For the common goal that we're trying to achieve. So, anybody want to add to that at all? I want to pivot the conversation a little bit into the next question, unless anybody has anything else they want to add. Hearing none, I want to shift the conversation a little bit. I want to talk now about barriers and challenges. It's kind of in the same vein, right? But I want to talk about barriers and challenges. What have been the biggest struggles that you've encountered when working with, whether it's Green Corps members or interns, student interns or undergraduates or any other programs that you might have experience with? What are those big challenges and what are those big barriers? One of the questions that did come in was about, well, how do you help a student that might be suffering from imposter syndrome, right? Or any of these other things that can happen in these types of situations. So what are your challenges? What are your barriers? And how do you help these students really get over some of those feelings of lack of confidence to be able to do some of these things, if that happens to be the case?
All right, I'm going to jump in. So two challenges I've faced. One is driving privileges. It's such a simple thing that we don't generally think about it, but not all organizations readily offer driving privileges for interns, or especially some if you're hosting a volunteer. So that one of the logistics that came really important, because you can't, that is a necessity. So that was one. The other one was the pay equity. We realized that, for example, for Green Corps, I love the program. This is credit to them. And the members come and they have committed to serve for a year, or even our engineering interns. But when I go grocery shopping, I cannot not think about how is an intern at 20 hours a week at the pay they're getting can do anything. So I see a lot of my friends think about, well, everybody has to pay their dues, but I'm thinking maybe today's economy, I don't, then it's got to be, we have to accept, we have to pay a lot more than what we're used to our interns or Green Corps members or others.
Other challenges, barriers, and ways that you've empowered these students?
I would add that we've found, especially with the Green Corps program, that it's hard to develop a work plan for someone you haven't met, we're not involved in the recruiting and hiring process. It's helpful from the organization, from a capacity standpoint, that we're not spending the time on that. But, it's something we've overcome, and it's not something, we can deal with, but it's just, we want to make sure that we're creating something for the student that will achieve our organization's goals, but also be adapted to their skills and interests and their passions, and get them what they need, to build their experiences and their education and training. So we just want stronger outcomes for them as well as for our organization. So creating that work plan in the beginning is hard. The other thing I've heard from students, unlike Michael's, Stormwater Corps program, where they've broken it up into 2 semesters. You've got a full year, you've got the classroom and a lot of learning happening, and then you do the real world experience that second semester. We try to do it all at once in our organizations, or in my organization. I shouldn't speak for everyone else. And so I have heard it's really overwhelming from the students' perspective, and we forget as, their mentors, as, as their trainers, that sometimes we need to take a step back and slow down and maybe spend a little bit more time up front, on the education piece of it, and really understand, what have you learned? Here's what you're working on. Where are the gaps? Those are a couple of challenges on our end.
That's great. Others?
Well, I think the financial challenges has been the greatest challenge for some of the youth that we've worked with, and we do provide, there's telephone and mileage reimbursement, and we give rides when we can, and try to be as supportive as we can in that program. And because I think the financial barrier is a real barrier. And again, I think on the flip side, what we can do is just to make that, consider that they're making a great investment of their time and not being financially rewarded. So our obligation is to make this as meaningful of an experience, a great learning experience, on the job training experience as we can, to kind of counterbalance the financial limitations for them.
Other comments or thoughts?
All right, I have already shared this idea about the financial reward. I think what Becky said, and I think, what we want to do, we're hoping that our volunteers or Minnesota Corps members or interns also represent the different fraction of the society. And I think if you want to look at the income, not everybody is financially blessed, especially for those people that getting enough paid that they can be independent, and even as acting as a service, or just to be on their own so they can go through the program. I think we just got to look at the financial reward a little differently.
And I think there is a piece to this. Again, we're developing skills, we're developing training and giving them experience, preparing them for really potentially a career in stormwater and low impact development and green infrastructure. One of the things in Mike's presentation, I'm very impressed by the amount of information and training and guidance, the depth and detail that are going into these reports coming out of these students. I was actually pretty shocked. And I imagine that sets them apart, right? As students with training that can get them a really good job in this area. And whether that's with a city or a watershed district or an agency or a consulting firm. So again, getting back to empowering these students with skills, with training, with experience, learning listening skills, communication skills, project management skills, all of those things really build these students up, I believe. And it obviously, like we were just saying, it doesn't come without challenges and barriers, right? We got to work through that stuff. But I think there's a lot of really great things that come out of this. Any other comments or additions to that thread of conversation? Looks like John Bilotta has his hand raised. I'll come back to you, Becky. Go ahead, John. And
Thanks, Andy. I was talking to Andy a little bit offline. One of the connections between Green Corps and comments you all made, especially Anna, but connecting back to Mike and UConn, maybe something people don't know with the Green Corps programs, we begin with an onboarding process in the fall. Now, it is short, mind you, but we start with NEMO 101, actually, with the Green Corps members, and then some other tools, not just from the university, but PCA and other partners. But this gets back to Anna's comment about how we onboard some of these students, giving them the base knowledge that they need. And what's really cool about Mike's program is they do a whole semester, and we are not afforded that luxury necessarily.
But maybe that's something we should consider, right? And whether that's, there's a variety of ways that we could do that. But I think that's a really good point, that onboarding process, that development process, because it can be a very steep learning curve, as came up previously, right? The jargon, the technical, all that stuff is a lot to take in, especially if you have no prior experience or exposure to it. So this actually leads to a question that I want you to, the panelists, to highlight. What are some of the qualities in the students that you've observed that have made them successful? What about the students that really get through these programs and really take a piece of it and run with it? What in them do you see? What in them do you find makes that possible? Because what I want to see is again, if our students are thinking about, well, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I can't make this, that's not me. If they can identify some of these things already within themselves that will make them successful and identify it and use it, I can see that really going a long way. So what have you seen in successful students that you've worked with?
If you want me to jump in, Andy, I got two. They're really easy. Organization and persistence. If you're organized and you're persistent, that's all I need. I can teach you everything else you need to know, really.
I think that's great. And talk about the pandemic building persistence in people, right?
That's true.
So others.
I would say self-motivation and just taking the initiative. And some of that's just, if you're stuck, being self-motivated, taking the initiative to ask your coworker questions and, brainstorm, being willing to collaborate, just because you're the newer person, maybe with a little less experience, your coworkers, at least in our organization, I'm sure across the board too, is just, they want to help and want to collaborate with you. And then I think the ability to work independently at times is also maybe even more so during the pandemic, but that's also a key trait of successful students.
Yeah, I love that ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? I think we could probably all agree we don't expect these interns and students to know everything coming in. So just ask questions, don't be afraid, and just grow and develop through this. Other comments on this?
Well, to keep adding to the one-word descriptions, I'm going to try commitment and incentive. I think commitment is because, again, we're blessed. We work with the Minnesota Green Corps members who have already made the commitment to give 11 months of their lives into something very focused. So that has been really, I mean, I find that just amazing because they already come in knowing they're going to be doing this. And that's the other thing is incentive. By that, I mean, is working with the engineering interns. They know they're going to have to apply for a job, and so have this incentive of getting some deliverables, so they also new experience, so they can share with their prospect employer. I've done this. I've finished this GIS project. I've done this design. So those two I found very helpful for me to get my job done for them. So they get the job done for us. So it's good.
Yeah, that's great. Other characteristics or qualities anybody want to highlight?
Yeah, I think everything that's been said is, I don't have much to add to that, but I would just, you called it commitment, Shahram, and I call it kind of passion for this work too. Is the young people usually come with that, and it's you know, what I always look for in any employee is passion for the work, and then asking questions I frame out as speak up for what you need, and the ability to speak up, and it comes back on we have to be able to listen and hear too, but the courage to speak up and ask for what you need.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's it. And these are all qualities that I think a lot of students come with, right? They have passion, they have commitment, they want to make a difference, right? Just getting over the fear of asking questions, getting over the intimidation factor, dive in, let's get this work done together and really grow and make a difference in the communities and for stormwater and water quality, right? That's really all of our goals here, is to have better water quality from our landscapes. So there's a couple questions that came in the Q&A. I'm going to start with the most recent one here first. Do any of you panelists, and Mike as well, do you continue to serve as a mentor or point of contact for former mentors, interns, after their job with you is done? Do you see them coming back to you with more questions and more insights and more opportunities for mentorship advice?
Okay, I'll just quickly share. I don't know if I've been a mentor, but I can tell you from experience and be mindful of it. I've worked with my previous interns or volunteers as colleagues. They have become my colleague. They have become my supervisors, my boss, and they're good friends. So the people you see today, they're very likely you will see in the future. So keep that in mind.
That's really good words. Yeah. Other responses to that?
The one thing, yeah, sorry about that, Becky. I didn't mean to step in. My answer is brief. I have continued a relationship with one of our Green Corps members. The Green Corps member went on to graduate school, which was wonderful. So stayed committed to this field, and then returned back to Minnesota and is now working for MPCA. But we periodically check in. He's asked me about the job and the job at PCA, and asked me to be a reference. So yeah, it's helped out. One thing I guess I've seen too is, I think I've seen them take off too with some of my seasonal staff as well. And maybe my job is done for a while and maybe they'll come back. But, I think that's a good sign if, they've taken off and are pursuing a career and maybe being a mentor to someone else, so.
Go ahead, Becky, jump in.
and I would just add that whenever possible, we are looking to these young people, whether it's the Green Corps member or the conservation crew members, we are looking at this as possibly to hire them if we can. And we actually have, 4 of our former Green Corps members are staff at Metro Blooms. And I've also served as just this recommendation. I'm actively recommending, giving positive recommendations, reaching out and saying, this person worked for us and they're really great. I recommend you hire them, that kind of thing. And looking at 2 ways that we can, while they're with us, to give them the opportunity to be seen in this field, to be invited to meetings and to share what they're working on. So people in our field that we're interacting with are seeing this person and all the great things that they're doing. So that next step for them might be a little easier.
Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the first, I would just say the Rainworks Challenge thing that I mentioned before. So 2 of the students that had worked for us over the summer or had been in my class were, brought together for that and, sought me out to get a little advice on that. So it's definitely happening, and I'm anticipating having more of that stuff happen as we go forward.
Well, and that's the thing, the more years you do this, right, and the further along the students get into their careers, it will come back around. I think that's something I want to highlight in several of these responses is something that's maybe, I don't know if undervalued is the right word, but that networking piece, right? Getting these students in connection with the communities, with other stormwater professionals, with agency people, with consulting firms, it really sets them up. Like Becky was saying, it showcases them doing these great things and allows them those opportunities for other people to see it and maybe hire them later, right? It really jumpstarts their careers and gets them out there, because it is a lot about who you know and how they know you, right? And your reputation. So giving that visibility to these students and showing and demonstrating their passion and their commitment to these things can go a really long way to get their careers going. So I think that's great. I wanted to reiterate and highlight that piece, that networking piece. So I'm going to take one more quick question before we close. I know we're getting very close to the end of our time here. And this question actually gets to some of the everything we've talked about a little bit. Has anybody here had any experience with maybe a non-traditional member or student or intern? And by non-traditional, I can mean a bunch of different things, but specifically in the question, maybe those with graduate degrees or significant professional experience, or maybe I will add, maybe coming from a completely different field and they want to get into stormwater and green infrastructure, but they had a prior career or a chunk of a career. How is that different, and how do you adapt compared to having a fresh undergrad or an undergrad that's in their program still? What has been your experience in this realm, if any? And maybe we don't have any. That's possible.
I feel like I failed the question. I'm boring. I don't have that. Maybe that's one area I should explore. That's a very good question.
And maybe that's something we should think about in these programs, right? Are we attracting those non-traditional students, or is there some barrier there that's
very good question,
limiting that? Anna, did you want to add something?
No, I was just nodding my head in agreement. I am a little embarrassed that, we don't have a lot of opportunities at the Watershed District. We're a small organization, so we tend to focus on some of these minimum qualifications, and sometimes stay real strict to those qualifications or our criteria. Mm-hmm. That we are not opening ourselves up to these non-traditional members that can bring even a fresher set of eyes or newer perspective. And, when we talk about diversity, in our organizations, it tends to be on that lens, but the diversity of perspective and experience, I think is really, maybe it's been a little undervalued or underappreciated and should be considered. So I really appreciate the question, and I'm going to think about that next time I'm looking to hire.
Other comments to that, please.
Yeah, I can add, it took me a while to think about that, an example of that, but I guess I do have a couple good examples. And one of them is a position we just recently filled where a candidate was from out of state, and this position was for a financial manager. And the opportunity to do that became obvious when we are all working remotely through COVID. And so we have our financial manager is from North Carolina, and it originally and still lives in North Carolina, and originally did not, that was not the first candidate we wanted to hire, but thinking, kind of expanding our thinking, decided why not hire that person. And another position we hired for is recently we hired our new director of community engagement. It was a person who is not in this field, but was very actively involved in the community that we are working in, and very active in doing all the things that, passionate about the environment, doing tree plantings in our community, and strong relationships in our community, but really had a career path that was very different than any engagement person that we have hired in the past. I think, the technical theater was the career path, but in both instances, it's been a really good choice. And thinking, being able to think, why not? I think it had to shift my way of thinking to make that decision.
Yeah, getting back to thinking outside the box, right? Challenging that status quo.
That's true.
Any other comments before we move into our closing question? Hearing none, I want to now move to close our panel discussion with this last question for each of our panelists. And I want to hear from everyone. I want to know, what are your key takeaways from this discussion today? What do you want to re-highlight for our audience that will help them in their jobs, both today and tomorrow, and for the students that might be considering a program like this? What would be your words of advice from our discussion today based on this topic? So I'm going to start with Shahram. Please go first. What are your key takeaways today?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you again for having us here. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. I think many of us heard a lot of good, strong, successful stories today. And I have personally have enjoyed the internships, and I think they're wonderful. There are a lot of good stories. And I just want to share from my perspective, this success has come with time commitment on my part. I have to realize when I go into it, the same way that the students or the interns have committed their time, I need to commit my time. And I had to learn that it doesn't go with the scheduled time. I'll see you every Monday at 8:30. That means that I may have to drop a very important meeting just to be available for the intern. And today's social skill requires me to be able to use text and other means. So I need to be available. So that availability, I think, if there is one single takeaway, it would be the availability of time. I need to be more available for that person than the regular scheduled times.
Yeah, that's
otherwise,
great.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Shahram. That's great. Becky, what would be your words of wisdom or key takeaways from our discussion today?
Well, I think Shahram had a really good takeaway. That was going to be mine too. I've really I've learned a lot, and it's a lot of this is just been reiterated. I could do a better job too. A lot of these things that we've been talking about today, and I really appreciate Michael the level of expertise and the level of training that your Storm Corps group gets every year. And I think making sure that the quality and professional level training is beyond engagement and project management skills and communication skills. I think a lot of the focus of the work is on, but really those science-based skills too, I think are really valuable too. So that's my takeaway. Maybe make sure that those opportunities are incorporated, no matter what the Green Corps' focus of their work is. I think giving them that wider, we can give them that wider experience that all that we have to offer them in the organization, and I think it's really important that we do that.
Yeah, that's great. Anna, what would you add from this for key takeaways?
Oh, let's see. One key takeaway, and this is probably more for any of the students that are in the audience, but it's been mentioned, but I just want to emphasize, because I know I've benefited, to just embrace every job opportunity, volunteer opportunity in this field, any project and task, no matter how small or big or how complex. It's all part of the learning and experience you're going to gain. And you never know when that project, the people you meet, who you work with, the networks you're going to create are going to come back to benefit you. And people, and don't be afraid to ask. Andy, recently you asked me to give a tour to one of your graduate students, and show her, in the field how we're taking, the education piece of it and to translate to real world projects. So I just encourage students to do that. And then I think if you're in the realm of creating a program or engaging students, one thing we've found, I didn't mention this, but I just wanted to make a point here, is try to give them experiences or projects that they can have ownership of. I think that's really important, where they can understand the projects, why it's important, how it's meaningful, how it connects to the organization's bigger goals, how they fit, and then give that ownership, and so that they can feel like they're helping to move the needle for the organization. So
that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. Mike, you get the last word. What would you give as our key takeaways today?
It's just been great to learn about the Green Corps and all the great work that all of our panelists are doing here. So I definitely look forward to bouncing ideas and questions off you when I have questions now. So it's nice to know there are other folks out there doing similar work. So I appreciate everything you do, and I appreciate your input today.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, panelists. I want to thank our panelists and Mike for presenting and for serving on this panel discussion. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us today. If you see this as the recording on YouTube, we hope you enjoyed it and you got something out of this. Tune in for our 2022 seminar series. We are developing the schedule for that. We're very excited to have some really good speakers and really engaging conversations in 2022. We hope you enjoy the holiday season, and we hope to see you in a future Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you in 2022. Bye for now.